This is a section out of the autobiography of Enrico Arrigoni, Freedom, My Dream. In 1916, before the entry of Italy into the First World War, Milan was perhaps the most important center of agitation against the war. It was only because of the government and the interventionist element, led by the traitor Mussolini, who had been thrown out of the Socialist Party as the editor of their daily newspaper Avanti, because he was in favor of the war, and then, with secret funds of the French government, he founded his daily Tu Popolo di Italia to preach for war, neutralizing the revolutionary elements, led above all by the anarchists, that Italy could enter the war without the danger of revolutionary explosions. Yes, it is true. Other stories were violently against the entry of Italy into the war, but Milan was the industrial center of that time, and also the center of pro-war propaganda. It was said that where Milan went, Italy would go, whether the rest of Italy wanted to do so or not. But Milan didn't surrender to the war folly, and still less the anarchist elements, particularly the youth, who were the shock force which drew with them all the other anti-interventionist forces into the anti-war battle. And it was mostly against the anti-war forces that Mussolini's fury was directed, because he didn't let them win with our continuous battles against them in the streets. You could say that we, the anarchist youth, in the last few weeks before the entry of Italy into the war, used to pass very few hours in our beds. Each night, we were busy with some action against the interventionist forces. Mussolini wanted to have his revenge against the Avanti by destroying it for throwing him out, and persisting in opposing the war. And when a couple of times he sent a crowd of his mercenaries to assault the Avanti, a number of anarchists were there also to help the socialists defend it, and real battles were fought. Mussolini's henchmen never succeeded, and they always had a good beating from us. One night, a dozen of us anarchist youth wanted to give a solemn lesson to the coward Mussolini, but as it was impossible to get near him because he had himself protected too well by his squadricisti everywhere he went, we decided to hit him right in his den, inside the house of Popolo d'Italia. As I said, especially created to foment war in Italy, we decided to assault him by surprise. But the editor's office, where Mussolini was preparing the paper, was in a small, long street, and it was impossible to get near him without being seen, particularly as it was defended by his Praetorian Guard. Therefore, in order to succeed in carrying out our project, we used a stratagem. One evening, a group of a dozen of us, arm in arm, entered the small street, not very well lit, singing with all of our voices the interventionist hymn, with refrains of, quote, "Viva Mussolini! Viva Mussolini!" end quote. His assassins, thinking that we were the partisans, and that we were coming to serenade their idol, let us pass by opening the great entrance door to their court where Popolo d'Italia was. Once in their fortress, we continued to shout, quote, "Viva Mussolini! We want Mussolini! Let Mussolini speak!" end quote. We were hoping that he would come out among us, so that we could put our hands on him. If he had, probably the history of Mussolini would have ended right there at that moment, because it was a question of saving the Italian people, and ourselves with them, from the massacre of war. But the skunk, who we knew already as the most cowardly man you can meet face to face, but didn't care to come down among us. Instead, surrounded by his Praetorian, he only trusted himself to come out on the balcony of the first floor, too high to be reached, with all the doors that led to him closed. Therefore, it was impossible to grab him, and we were in the den of wolves. So we were forced to end the comedy. As soon as he opened his mouth to punish us with one of his speeches, we threw at him everything hidden we were carrying. But the coward, at the first projectile that hit him, and the first shout of, quote, "Down with war! Down with Mussolini!" end quote, threw himself to the floor of the balcony, and we were forced to engage in battle with his Praetorian, who, recovering from the surprise, threw themselves on us ferociously for daring to attack their god. We had sworn that none of us would fall into their hands alive, and together, all bruised, it was true, we succeeded in retreating, and then disappearing, as we had planned, before the police would arrive. We had failed, but with the satisfaction that if we had succeeded, the history of Italy would have perhaps followed a different course, and a million victims would probably have been spared the Holocaust. Such are sometimes the surprises of history, a small fact loaded with consequences. In these notes, I didn't intend to give a detailed chronology of each event of those 4 years. I only want to paint with some strokes chosen episodes in order to bring them back to life as personal participation, which in my view is the only valid means to recreate the authenticity and the experienced moment. I said that I knew well the cowardice of the comedian Mussolini, from the time that he was still the director of Avanti, the socialist daily, and loved to pass himself off as the most revolutionary of revolutionaries. In spite of his continuous incitations for his truculent speeches for action in the streets, we anarchists, at moments of collision with the police and demonstrations he had incited, never saw Mussolini. So it is always we who come out of these demonstrations with broken heads. But one day we anarchists decided to play a trick on him, in order to have a good laugh at his expenses. Grave agitations were happening in that moment, with many confrontations with the police forces in the streets. And one day, a public meeting took place at the socialist Camera de Lavoro, a huge place. The hall couldn't hold all the demonstrators, who were spread out even in the streets. We must have been more than 10,000 people. There were a number of speakers, Mussolini being the last and generally the most violent. We knew that it was his habit, in order to pose as a great revolutionary, to incite the crowd to go out in the street and attack the police in order to clear the way for the demonstrators to reach the Piazza del Duomo, which is at the center of the city. While once in the streets, he would vanish and leave us alone to get our heads broken by the police sticks. But this time, we were determined to make his game fail, by forcing him to be with us at the head of the demonstration, so as to let him also taste the sticks of the police and the sabers of the cavalry on his own body. In order to succeed in this ruse, of dozen of us anarchists placed ourselves near the stand, and as we had foreseen, Mussolini ended his speech, shouting like a madman. It was also a comedy on his part. Quote, "Everybody, into Duomo Square! Into the den of the bourgeois!" End quote, which meant encounters with the sticks of the policemen and the sabers of the cavalry that were waiting for us at strategic points along the way. So we answered, with our comedy, quote, "Yes, yes, everybody into Piazza del Duomo, down with the bourgeois, hooray for Mussolini, Mussolini in front leading the masses, hooray for the revolution," end quote. And before he could vanish, we grabbed him by the legs, pulling down from the platform, and surrounding him. We pulled him to the street, while he, trapped among us, was forced to continue shouting in our company, "To Duomo Square! To Duomo Square!" And this time, we were not going to let him escape. We wanted to have some fun ourselves. The street in which the Camera del Lavoro was located was rather narrow. Pointing in the direction of Duomo, it led first to a little square near the Naviglio Canal, which at the time was still uncovered. And in order to advance towards the Piazza del Duomo, a good mile away, we had to cross a narrow bridge. And there, after breaking through a couple of police blocks, each one composed of several lines of policemen, in the little square in front of the little bridge, the cavalry was waiting to charge us in the event the police had not succeeded with their sticks in stopping the crowd composed of thousands pushing behind us like an avalanche. We anarchists, having had many such encounters, knew that due to the narrowness of the street and the little square, only the first 200 or 300 would be able to intervene in the fighting, the other 1,000 serving only as pressure, and Mussolini, in front, surrounded by us, would be forced to fight if he wanted to save his own skin or escape. And this is what we succeeded in doing in the heat of the melee, which was charged by the cavalry, and we were broken up, each of us being forced to fight for one's self. And there was a short pause, while the cavalry was regrouping, and we were busy digging up more stones to throw at the police and cavalry, only our free weapons. We looked around, and Mussolini had vanished. It was later, after we had succeeded in forcing the police and the cavalry to retreat at some distance, that we discovered him hiding under the stairs of a house shaking with fear. What could we do with a coward like that? We just laughed. I left him there. While with the coward, we continued to fight, as we didn't succeed in digging him out. That's how cowardly he was. The rest of this book is available at littleblackcart.com, publisher of anti-political books.